panelists. Now we are going to have a session about the hybrid work environment. So I don't know how many of you all have had some issues with a hybrid work environment and your workforce deciding that they want to stay home or they only want to come in 1 day a week. There's any number of varieties of ways to frame it. For TIA, we had our team come back 3 days a week in June of 2021. And just recently, we decided to have Tuesday be the day that everyone's in the office, because it's tough, as you know, if there's only 3 people in any given day, it's really tough to collaborate. And we thought, what a great opportunity to have everybody that we can be there together. So I have a lot of smart people, though, who are going to tell us a little bit more about what to think about, what to think through, how to get buy-in from your team. So we have some amazing panelists: Eric Arling, James Kelly, Charlie Safro, and Sarah Ruffcorn. Thank you so much. Please come up to the stage.
Near the end, yeah. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you being here. Welcome to our discussion panel today on, I had to write this down, shifting to a hybrid work environment in a post-COVID world. We'd like to thank our panel, Jay, Charlie, and Sarah. So we've got great panelists today. Please get active in on the app, submit any questions. We'll try to get those folded in as best we can. Like to thank, obviously, the sponsors, all the vendors. One of the great things about the TIA events is the ability to interface with, the folks that really support our businesses so much of the time. When we talk about uncertainty, whether it be workforce uncertainty, freight market uncertainty, your relationships with your vendors and your partners are really what allows you to be resilient. So I'd encourage everybody to make that part of their strategy moving forward if it's not already. So appreciate getting to see everybody. So first, we're going to open it up with a poll question. Everybody's favorite icebreaker these days. Basically, how would you best describe your current work environment? Fully on-site, hybrid, or fully remote? So if you'd answer that in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the app as well, that would be great. And now we will move it on and turn it over to our panel to give their introduction and a little bit about their current work environment.
How's everybody doing? My name's Jay Kelly. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Integrity Express Logistics. I've been in my role for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was a partner at a law firm where I started the transportation and logistics practice group. I've got a lot of former clients in the audience today. But as far as it relates to Integrity and what we did, prior to COVID, we were fully in office. We had very few instances of remote workers, and quite frankly, when COVID came along and we were reading the tea leaves, we panicked. We did not know, our employees had the ability to work remotely on a case-by-case basis, but we did not know how having all of those users working remotely at one time would impact our network, our servers, et cetera. So we went into that. Our IT department did a phenomenal job. We ended up working remotely without a hitch, and that kind of opened up our eyes. We didn't think that was possible before, but it opened up our eyes as to what would work in the future. Now, with that said, our structure requires that we do a certain amount of training in person. So we were quick to get people back. And when I say quick, in 3 to 4 months, we had I would say at least half of our workforce back in the office. At 6 months, we were close to 75%. And as we got to that year mark, we were almost fully back in. But what it allowed us to do was allow certain groups whose job requirements dictated to work remotely over time. Our IT group is largely remote. We have operations people that are remote. Even our marketing team is remote a lot of the time. So What COVID did for us is it allowed us to open up kind of how our employees work every day. And that can be a recruiting tool, which I'm sure Charlie will get into at some point.
Sure can. Good morning. My name's Charlie Safro. I am the president and founder of CS Recruiting. We're a third-party recruiting firm specializing in this space. So we work throughout the supply chain, logistics, transportation industries, recruiting talent across North America at all levels. We've got about 45 people on our team. Most of our team is back in Chicago. However, we are a fully remote company. So we'll speak about this as time goes on, but we were a hybrid company for about 8 years. It was really part of our culture and how our brand morphed over time. And then after the pandemic, we got to that point where I'm sure all of you were feeling like, okay, we're gonna go back in July and we need to figure out how to get everyone 6 feet apart and plexiglass, and now it's September, and now it's January. And we ended up taking a poll, having a lot of conversations with our team, and made the decision to go fully virtual in March of 21. So I will tell you, it is not an easy transition, but it is very possible, and I'm very proud of what our team has done from a system, policy, process standpoint to really keep our team connected. And I'm gonna say they're probably more connected now than we were when we were in an office together. So excited to talk about this topic.
Yes, and I am Sarah Ruffcorn. I am the president of Trinity Logistics, and we had some hybrid work going even before COVID on some of our teams. And so for us to be able to pick up and go home took us just a few hours. We had put a lot of disaster recovery things in place, which you heard a little bit from Stephen yesterday, for those of you that were here, in place already. And so for us to pick up and go home, it was just, you know, making sure everybody could connect to Wi-Fi. But I will tell you that through that time, we have learned a lot. And you learn a lot about yourself, you learn a lot about your leadership, you learn a lot about your business, you know, when everybody is working from home for that time. And so it's been interesting, you know, as we have come back and said, okay, what does this look like now? And how do we want to move forward in this new environment? And so, yeah, there's a lot of conversation that I'm sure we'll be having today about that. But it's been good to be able to give that, you know, that flexibility to some of these teams. So,
Charlie, what are you seeing? So now everybody's saying that, you know, we hired people as this type of worker or in this type of environment, and expectations have shifted. So what's the market look like as far as, you know, from a retention or from a recruitment standpoint? What are you seeing that people are looking for from an employment standpoint as far as the mix that they're sort of looking for?
Sure. So the market is confusing right now. If any of you are struggling to recruit and retain talent, you are not alone. Right now, I will say that candidates are still very much in the driver's seat, which means that there are more jobs than there are candidates, but that means that candidates are qualified, they're capable, they're legally able to and interested in working for your company. So you can't just think about this big candidate pool and, you know, anyone is available. There's a lot of layers you put into the sourcing and recruiting process. So keep that in mind. Candidates are still in the driver's seat. I am starting to sense some fear in the market with this looming recession, and starting to see some companies put searches on hold until next year. Also seeing some companies promote internally, which while we may lose that search, nothing makes me happier than seeing companies that are retaining through really growing and developing their own people instead of going out and hiring someone new. So that's the market in whole. I will tell you that right now, there are about 20% of the jobs you see on LinkedIn are advertised as fully remote jobs. In 2020, just before the pandemic, 2% of the jobs on LinkedIn were remote. So huge increase, as you can imagine. But the really interesting trend here is that job seekers who go on LinkedIn, 50% of them are applying to the 20% of the remote jobs. So let that sink in for just a minute, that there are still 80% of these jobs that are either hybrid or off-site. They're just not getting the applications. I'm not saying that, you know, you can't recruit those people. There are plenty of people who still want to be on site, plenty of people who thrive in a hybrid environment. But I will say candidates are very attracted to remote. And I think it's more than just the environment. Yes, there's, the lack of commute and not having to, put shoes on in the morning. But to me, working remote means that you are trusting your people, and there's no better way to show trust than to be hands-off and let them schedule their own time and manage their own workload. So to me, remote is more about providing flexibility, which in turn provides trust. When happy employees are trusted, they will be productive. So sum it up that way.
Thank you. Sarah, so you're hearing, the influx of job seekers are looking for a very specific thing. How has Trinity sort of responded to that to, fill the open positions, retain your current people, and, remain competitive without sacrificing, things that you're not comfortable as a leader, letting go of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you have to evaluate that on each position, right? It's not one size fits all. It's not one size fits all for every person for remote work. It's not one size fits all in office. But I think the job roles and responsibilities as well is not a one size fit all. So I think it's really important as we've looked at hiring some really great talent. I think remote work has really opened us up to the ability to hire some really high level talent that we wouldn't typically have. I mean, we're in Seaford, Delaware as our corporate office, right? Like, who knows where that is? Nobody. There's more chickens in our state than people. So, there's certain things that we have had to adjust for just in general as we've hired talent and brought them in and recruited them and moved them to the state. But this, allowing team members in certain roles to be fully remote has really opened up that skill set for us, where we're okay if they're in Oklahoma or wherever. So, for us, we look at that job role and we say, okay, depending on that leader, depending on that particular function, that particular department, how best can that whole team get their work done? And how best can that role get their work done? Is it highly collaborative? Does it need some collaboration? Is it really just a tactical job where they are just in it all day long, inside their computer all day long? And so, looking at that and being able to evaluate that very honestly with ourselves has been really helpful for us to be able to gauge which ones need to be remote, which ones can be hybrid, and which ones need to be fully in the office.
So are you looking at that as role plus individual, or how do you sort of characterize this is a good remote opportunity, or this person would do well remotely?
Yep.
And then you've kind of got fractions within some people on the same team might be in office versus remote. How do you keep everybody happy in that scenario?
That's not easy, right? Keeping everyone happy. I think we all. I don't know if that's possible. But what we do is we just really evaluate the role first. Like, what makes the most sense? If they're a biller, does it make sense that they actually need to be in the office all the time? If they are, if they're coding all day long, do they really need to be in the office all the time? So I think first evaluating that role and then posting and looking and searching for that right candidate. Of course, you still go through the interview questions when it comes to the culture piece and all the things, that go into that. But then making sure that that team member, understands too what's required and what the expectation is and what the accountabilities are gonna be, so.
Charlie, are you seeing certain types of backgrounds or job applicants sort of gravitating more in one direction or the other?
Certainly. I mean, in our industry, we have to recognize that there are plenty of positions that will always be on site. If you think of the facility level, the terminal level, those are non-negotiable. Employers can absolutely still provide flexibility around the scheduling, the days of the week, the shifts, but those jobs need to be on site. I truly think if it is a job that is at a desk behind a computer, there's a good chance that if the person is trained properly, they have the right tools, resources, processes to follow, that they can do it from home. Historically, sales jobs in our industry, I would say, were the ones that were remote pre-pandemic, especially outside sales. But now, carrier sales, even cradle to grave, I think when you get into that manager level, then you really need to just consider where's the team, how is the team working, and do we need that manager with them every day, 3 days a week, never. So it really, for us, it comes down to the company. We'll respect whatever philosophy our clients have, but we could certainly advise if a search is not coming to fruition, location and work environment may very well be a barrier.
how have you been able to sort of manage your clients in the sense of, no, this is an in-office thing, that's how we've always done it, that's how we're going to keep doing it, and saying, yeah, but you're kind of the last one who's viewing it that way. How have you sort of navigated through that hurdle?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic that often turns into a debate, and that's not my goal. But I think the proof is in the pudding. I'll tell you all about a bit of a case study. We had a client. I'm going to say they're a $30 million brokerage in the Northeast in a market that is very challenging to recruit simply because there's not a lot of competition. So they don't have a pool of talent that is breeding there locally. So for 8 years, we worked on a carrier sales position, we filled it once or twice, that's it, over 8 years, and kept it open. They made the decision to go fully remote early 2021. We've placed 16 carrier sales reps with them since then. All of them have been retained. All of them are spread out across the country, covering different time zones and markets. So when you think about, do you want talent in your 20-mile radius? And if that is firm, you're going to get the best person who lives near your office, or do you want the best person for the job and really understanding that you're going to have to open up that radius? Doesn't have to be nationwide. It could be 50 miles or in your state or in your region, but there's no question you have to be where the talent is.
Yeah, one thing, a quick issue that we saw, unfortunately we saw it right when we were coming back from the pandemic, and when you're a proponent of the hybrid or remote work environment, this is something that you don't want to see early on. But we had a high-level IT employee, full-time employee with us, and he took on another position as a CIO of a startup. So, our board comes and says, what should we do about this? And you see this concept publicized a lot more now. I can't say that I saw it much pre-COVID, and like Charlie said, you're seeing more and more remote jobs. There's the concept of being overemployed. So essentially you're having not one, but 2, 3, maybe even 4 remote positions where you can capitalize on your monetary income. We had the internal discussion, and as long as our employees are doing what they're paid to do, we don't have a problem with that. But it is something that organizations have to take a look at, because if a person is overemployed and their second or third job is taking away from what you very handsomely pay them to do, that can create problems within the organization, can create problems within their own teams, because they're looking at the person next to them, or the person next to them is looking at them saying, why can't I do that? So again, just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's certainly prevalent in the technology industry. It's because there's a lot of freelance opportunities. Kind of lend itself to that, and it's a creative position, and there's other creative outlets. So I think it's, why do they have that itch is something I think you've got to ask yourself, or what, you're not fulfilling them professionally. So that's maybe something to ask yourself as a leader of, I'm missing a developmental opportunity. If someone's looking out, they want to work, they're going to do more work, I want them to do it for me. I'm paying their benefits and, carrying all that good stuff. So I think there's definitely, just different conversation. No one's really had that conversation of, hey, why do you have 2 jobs beyond us? Like, you want to work 60 hours? Great. Let's talk about how I can give you more responsibility or expand your role or something along those lines, because there's certain plenty of work to get done within your organization. And because there'll be times that we sort of notice, hey, that guy's always gone from 3 to 5. They can't do meetings then. What's going on there? So certainly just, particularly in the IT space, that's something we ran into. So Jay, you see the poll results, 78% are hybrid. As a council, you used to have this nice, tidy pocket of where you knew where everybody was going to be when. If they weren't in their seat at 8 o'clock, somebody could tell you. Now there's sort of all this ambiguity and unknown that has now entered, the employment liability space. How, where do you start with that? Because that's a loaded topic, to say the least.
Yeah, and it's tough for everyone. It started in COVID, and while we were trying to keep track of the changing federal and state-by-state regulations as it related to the transportation of freight, the goalposts kept moving when it related to employees, when they could come back to work, and all the other considerations that you have to take into account when you have people that are in the office and not in the office. So a couple things that we were, I guess, focused in on early on, the first one being the FLSA. Now, nobody in here needs to know what that is, but it's the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the big, scary thing that can happen under the Fair Labor Standards Act is you can get hit with a class action lawsuit. So the concern from an employer standpoint with the FLSA, and a very common claim, is off-the-clock work. So that means I'm a non-exempt employee, which we don't need to know, but just figure I'm an hourly employee. I'm working from home, and our industry is unique. I mean, one of the service offerings that a lot of logistics companies offer, they say we're available 24/7. Well, are you working 24 hours a day, or are you available 24 hours a day? A lot of salespeople would say they're working 24 hours a day, and they're fielding calls and doing that. So when you're dealing with off-the-clock work, you have to be comfortable with the people that you have working remotely, that they're accurately recording their time if they need to record their time. Because a person could go home, they could do the normal 8 to 5, and then let's say they take a phone call at night, or they're responding to emails. If they're not logging that work, but they claim to have done it and then have an issue with having done it and not been paid for it, the company then has an issue. So off-the-clock work is an easy one. It's one that companies have to deal with all the time. But the FLSA was on our radar very early on. Confidential and proprietary information, that was data security. That was always something that you think about, or companies think about. For us, on an individual employee level, unfortunately, whether you agree with them or not, our company does have a non-compete. But I believe this applies to, and it especially applies to the non-solicit world. When you have employees working remotely, what access to information do they have? Do they have carte blanche access to information? Because not that they couldn't do the same thing in the office, and that does not escape me, but when you're in the confines of your own home or someplace a little more private, it might be a little more enticing to take down that customer information, take down that training information that you could use later on down the line if you wanted to start your own brokerage, if you went to work for a competitor. There's little things like that, or small challenges like that, that a remote environment can promote. But again, and we'll talk about this, a lot of that comes back to culture. If you have employees that are working from home, you obviously trust them. You would expect that they're not misappropriating their time or your information. So those were a couple things early on. I think when we start talking about who can work from home and when, we do run into different discriminatory issues. You know, you cannot arbitrarily choose who can work from home and who cannot. There needs to be a basis for that. And I'll back up. One thing that we saw early on is we would have employees come and request to work from home. But a couple of them may have been nervous about the reasons they wanted to. And it was okay to say, hey, I want to come work from home because it's convenient for me and my lifestyle. For whatever reason, people didn't think that that was the case at the beginning. So they would come and they would say, I need to work from home for X, Y, and Z reason. Well, from a legal standpoint, we started needing to try and figure out, well, are they asking for the privilege of working from home, or are they actually asking for a medical accommodation? And those are far, far different things. So those are things that you need to be aware of as you navigate this environment.
So with that, how do you maintain culture with all that stuff going on? Because that's sort of the underpinning of a lot of, not only this conversation, but a lot of the panel conversations. You know, I think one of the largest challenges I think that everybody faces is, but what about my culture if everybody's from home? Sarah, how have you, as somebody who values your culture, is part of, you know, why Trinity does what they do and why they retain and recruit who they do, how have you sort of married those two concepts that are on paper, at least prior to COVID, were sort of oppositional forces.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't know that we truly know the long-term effects yet, right? So we're making decisions based off of what we know, off of a fairly shorter time frame than than everybody being in person. So I really believe, and this goes back, you know, we all know companies that are 100% in office and have terrible cultures, right? And we know companies that are fully remote and have terrible cultures. We know companies that are fully in person and have awesome cultures. And we know companies that are fully remote and have awesome cultures. I don't know the impact of one or the other because it all always boils down to leadership. And so how are you investing in your leadership? How are you teaching them to lead a remote team force? How are you teaching them to lead an in-person or a hybrid workforce? And so I still think it all still boils down to the strength of your leadership at the end of the day. And how are they supporting their team to be successful and bring their whole self to work every day and care about them? You know, yesterday morning session was just talking about loving each other, but I think it really does boil down a lot to like just truly caring and being, you know, open and honest and having a healthy workforce and a healthy organization where you can have tough conversations when somebody's not performing, whether they're in the office or they're remote. And so, you know, what are we doing to make sure? I mean, a big focus of ours is just leadership training. We spend a lot of time, resource, and energy on that to be able to give our leaders the tools to be able to lead effectively, no matter where their team is at. And so, I think sometimes we just need to keep it simple and not overcomplicate it, because it can get very complicated with all the legalities and all the things. But at the end of the day, if you're caring for your team, you're doing everything you can to provide the best environment for them to bring 100% to work every day, for them to bring their whole self to work, and truly be engaged and love what they do. A lot of times that is boils down to leadership. So,
Charlie, when you're speaking with candidates, what are they looking for from a company's leadership? Maybe that's trending in a different direction or is top of mind in a way that it wasn't before.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, everyone is looking for money and more money. That's why we work. But I will say our assessment is that compensation has kind of dropped from a priority standpoint in terms of why candidates are looking or what it is that actually drives them to leave one company and join another. And what's rising to the top is so simple. I just want to be treated like a human. And that means that I want to be respected no matter what level I'm at, no matter if I'm sitting behind a desk or behind a wheel. I want to be appreciated and recognized for my little wins, my big wins. And that is what it's about. People also really want purpose right now. And so as much as you can play up this idea of, you know, how is their job enabling the supply chain? How is their job helping even the end consumer, because they want to feel that connection to purpose? So that is a lot of what we're seeing. And from a location standpoint, I mean, there's no question. I'd say every candidate asks us if there are remote opportunities for them, and if not, if there are hybrid opportunities. We also definitely see candidates that come to us and that is the only reason they would leave. They're currently in an office 5 days a week and they're open to exploring their value in the market only for a role that requires more or offers more flexibility. So it's across the board, but it's appealing to any candidate out there, the thought of being able to work remotely, permanently or part-time. But I agree with Sarah, it really comes back to leadership and how the company is structured.
Yeah, one of the Q&A questions that came in was, do you allow more flexibility in regards to working hours when working from home? Example, picking up kids, running small errands. I would ask the question, why does that have to be a work from home concept, right?
Great point.
You know, and I think when we go back to, do you trust each other? You know, I trust you to use good judgment whether you're at home or in the office, right? And one of the conversations we had was, well, how do we know if they go home? How do we know if they're working? It's like,
Did they hit their goals?
Is that the person that's for your organization? You know, if you're asking that question about that person, is that, you know, you take a step back and wonder, well, what do you think they're doing in the office? If you don't think they're going to work from home, they can waste plenty of time in the office, in distracting other people. So maybe, we've seen benefits of people working from home that have been more productive because they don't kind of take the low-hanging fruit of ways to waste time and walk by different, kind of take the long way back from the water cooler and things like that. Jay, how do you balance, what's the legality as far as, or even legality as far as, what's the word, the accommodation? A reasonable accommodation has been, there's new terminology that sort of comes along with that. So what's a reasonable accommodation? What's, just treating people with a level of maturity that, they would like to be treated? How does that all sort of tie together?
Yeah, so for those that are unfamiliar with the accommodation space, a request to work from home that would be a privilege would just be, I want to work from home. And you decide whether or not that's appropriate for that employee. A reasonable accommodation would be, I need to work from home because I cannot focus in this particular setting. And maybe they can't focus because there's an ADD issue or some other medical condition that prevents them from doing that. When you're looking at a reasonable accommodation, you just have to look at what is reasonable. So if they say, I want to work from home, I need a custom-made bed that can go up and down to make me feel comfortable during the day, you don't have to do that. That's not a reasonable accommodation. But allowing that person to work from home or take breaks at certain points of the day that are particularly stressful for them based on their medical condition, that would be an accommodation. Typically, and I won't say that I haven't seen some crazy ones, typically employees that come to you are coming with a reasonable request because, again, we're talking about something that's very personal, sensitive, and oftentimes not what they want to talk about with their employer. So it is very much a space where you need to have people that are operating with emotional intelligence and treating your employees with empathy in those situations.
A couple of questions have come in regarding sort of supplying at-home equipment, but then also monitoring and tracking employees. Sarah, how have you guys handled, do you guys provide equipment for remote employees? And then, obviously, budget considerations, if they're just sort of a different wrinkle to P&Ls and financials in that point. And then once people have equipment and they are working remotely, how are you sort of monitoring productivity and things of that nature?
Yeah, so even before COVID, everyone had laptops. We went to that early on. We have multiple monitors and a laptop, and that's just standard package. So whether you're in the office or you're working from home, that's the same. And yes, we provide all the equipment, as well as all on the online training. And I feel like some people forget about that, but all of the training that we used to do in person had to all go virtual as well. And so, when we're managing, we have 7 regional offices, we have 130 agents. It's a lot all the time going on. But we've started that years ago. When it comes to monitoring, I think that just comes down to just, again, trust and accountability, right? Like at the end of the day, what's the result that you're trying to get? We're a Microsoft office, so we have Microsoft Teams. There's constant communication with those team members. There's stand-up meetings every day. All video is on, and that's a big thing that we have gone to, just you gotta turn your camera on. And just making sure that you're being really intentional with those connections, I think is one thing, but then making sure that they have really clear accountabilities for results. And at the end of the day, if you don't think they're doing what they need to be doing, then you can make a different decision, and so can they, right? I always say you can be part of the Alumni Association. But I think that those are things that you just have to know and do, based off of what is happening, in that particular department, and knowing your team, again, just caring about them. I was reading an article this week, and it was talking about work-life balance, how that's not a thing anymore. And I'm like, huh? And you kind of read through, and it's like work-life integration. And I do think, back to what you were saying, why does, running to grab your kids from the bus stop, does that always just have to be a remote opportunity? Can we, create a little more flexibility in the workday? And I think we can. I think when you're caring about your team, at the end of the day, and we all have those moments, we all have those chapters in our lives, And what can we do to do that well and serve them well? And in return, that loyalty is strong, and we've seen that really come through when we're doing a good job at that. So,
Jay, a couple of questions I know that we have dealt with at Integrity since we've shifted, I guess is the term, getting equipment returned and employees moving to different states.
Okay. Yeah, those are a lot of fun. So the equipment return is, I'm assuming that is in the context of a termination, which we have dealt with multiple times. Typically what we did is we would send prepackaged boxes and packing materials to the employees for them to return it. I would love to be able to say it began and ended with that. It did not. I would say we were successful with that about 50% of the time. Another 25% of the time we're trying to chase it down, and another 25% of the time, and this took a lot of convincing, even though we're not talking about big dollars, we just let it go because it is just not worth chasing. The second part of that with employees moving to different states is actually a pretty important one. We did have that happen. We continue to have employees that will move to different states. But as it relates back to the business, what you need to keep in mind is if you have an employee presence in any state, you may or may not have to register to do business in that state, and there are certainly tax implications. And the tax implications are not small. I can tell you we have one remote employee working in New York City. It is not worth having that one employee work in New York City. It does not pay for itself. And that's the case in many other states. So you will want to have, I think policy is a little rigid. I think you want to have discussions with your employees and more so your managers. So your managers they know that if somebody would like to move states, they know the conversations that they need to have with those employees before they do so, because it can have an unhealthy impact on the organization.
Charlie, a good question for you. If unemployment numbers tick back up because of strains in the economy, how does that change the employee-employer leverage and flexibility kind of possibly shifting in a different direction?
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced it will switch. It's just a matter of when. And we've all seen this in our industry and just the global talent market in general. It has happened before where there are, there are companies that are hiring and there are there are not enough people. So it will switch. I think companies have to pivot. They have to know their selling points, and you can never figure that out too early. So I'm just looking at the results of this poll. Like, what is it that your company offers that sets you apart? What's your competitive advantage? Is it your culture? The funny thing is that recruiting and retention are very connected. So if you think about what you offer your current team to keep them, your most loyal employees, what makes them stay, that is exactly what will attract your new talent. So whether you are putting videos out there or testimonials or stories, people want to see other people in roles that they can relate to, that it will resonate with. And that is, your employees are your best advocates for new recruits. So I think you have to think about all that every time you either pivot or you just feel really good about what you have to offer. That is your retention and recruiting strategy right there. You just need to show it off a little.
Sarah, when we were sort of prepping, we covered, how do you keep sort of in this one of the questions, how do you sort of retain that internal knowledge? How do you keep groups together and not have them be fragmented? So how do you assess sort of the blend of in office, out of office? How have you sort of structured that within some of your teams?
Mm-hmm. So really empowering the leadership that's running the team and holding them accountable to the result. So some of our teams are in 1 day a week and then 4 days remote. Some of our teams are 3 days a week in the office, 2 days remote. some of them 4-in-1, and those are conversations that we have as an executive team with the particular department leader, with the particular team lead. I mean, it's really going down to that level and how best that particular team is working, and just assessing the result at the end of the day. You know, are they doing what they need to be doing? What does that look like? But I will say, I do, and we have started just to put a lot more intentionality around just connecting points. So if we have a team that is fully remote, you know, making sure we're getting them in the office in person a couple times a year is still really critical for us. And that just, again, establishes really great relationships. We do a lot the week that they're in. We just brought a bunch of our remote team members in and every night we had like different things planned. I think one night they did like a paint night, and another night they did bowling, and another night, but just really being intentional around doing some team building activities to then, when they go back out remote, it's very different when you're picking up the phone and you know that person on a much more personal level. And so I think doing that a few times a year has really helped keep that connection with those fully remote team members. I know you're doing something kind of similar to that too. We were just talking about that, but I think that you just have to think differently around how to create those long-term relationships and still allow them to do their work well, and balancing that, and it's not easy. I mean, I wish we had it all figured out. I wish I could say we were doing everything great or perfectly, but I have no idea. I think we're all just trying to figure that out and make sure that we're doing the best we can at that. But I do think that just put some thought into it. You know, don't just take it for granted and just say, okay, set it and forget it, we're good. I think you have to keep evaluating that every quarter. We evaluate it every quarter. And we're very intentional about saying, is this working, is this not working, and how so? And I think really coming down to like getting the team members' feedback too. How do you guys think this is working? Do we have the right mix? Getting their involvement in that, asking them those questions, you know, doing pulse surveys. Those are all things that it's a constant feedback loop. It's not just us making a decision and saying this is how it's going to be, and them making a decision saying this is how it's going to be. It's very collaborative, you know, when we're making those decisions on teams.
Charlie, how have you sort of kept a level playing field? Because some people who are in the office, you know, there is that opportunity for FaceTime with leadership, and you can kind of bounce, you know, there's just a different dynamic there than same role, same, you know, everything, but remote's different than in the office. How have you kept everyone feeling like they had sort of an equitable seat at the table?
And I think having policies where everyone is treated equal, I know that probably bleeds into your space, Jay, but I mean, that is so important, and that is when employees are going to get frustrated or bitter if they feel like they're not being treated or they don't have the same, you know, work from home privileges as somebody else for an unexplained reason. When I started my company, I was a one-woman show for about a year, and when I went out to hire my first employee, I was in the suburbs of Chicago. I found someone in the city, and I said to her, if you accept this offer, like I was very, very raw with my business. Like, I'll get business cards and I'll even get an office and you'll come to the office, but the one catch is I had 3 kids under 4 at that point, and I didn't have childcare on Wednesdays or Fridays. So part of my offer letter to our first employee was, you'll come to the office Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, you'll work from home because I don't have childcare. And it's just really funny how that has created our whole culture. Our second employee came on, I offered her the same deal. Third employee, and up until 2020, our entire office operated as such. We did it very differently, and now that hybrid is being discussed and, you know, different strategies, different tactics to make it work, I look back and I'm actually like, I think we actually did it very well for just, you know, making it up as we went along, because we had all of our team meetings Mondays and Thursdays when everyone was in the office, lots of water cooler talk, lots of camaraderie, lots of going to lunch together. And then the days we were at home, I don't think I ever once in 10 years Zoomed an employee before the pandemic. Like, we just left them to work, you know, have your quiet time at home, work on your projects, have your confidential conversations. No one's gonna hear you, no one's gonna bother you. And so that's really how our culture morphed until we became fully remote. So I think having that equality piece, and also the one complaint I hear from candidates that are in remote environments where everyone is on a different schedule, is, I'm on a call with my boss and 2 other colleagues. They were told to be in the office on Tuesday. I work from home on Tuesday. We finish our meeting, we hang up, and then what am I missing out on being at home when they go to lunch and continue the conversation? So I think back to what Sarah said, it's just being mindful and intentional and making sure that people aren't left out, having that very equal and inclusive culture regardless of where you work. It's just a whole other layer of compliance we have to think about.
So as people hear hybrid, they hear, well, you're 60-40, 70-30. I know certain business leaders will hear, so my brick and mortar office space is empty what % of the time? Because I'm paying 100% of that payment, right? How has office space or brick and mortar, how has that been affected? Sarah, we'll start with you, just as far as physical space and sort of how that gets treated.
It's for us, it's the same. Because we have people kind of always coming in and out, we've kept all the same buildings. We own one building, we lease the others. We've kept that all the same. We haven't made a major change of just saying, okay, we're no longer going to have an office here. We've kept that all the same.
Have you had to re-sign? Have you had any leases come due that you had to commit to?
Yeah, in fact, our Orlando office, we just signed a brand new lease probably 2 months ago. A bigger office space, actually, because we have a lot more team members that are coming in, and they're doing hybrid schedules, but we still need more desks. So that hasn't changed, anything from making a different lease decision or a different, building versus, building decisions for us at all. No.
Yeah, when we made the decision to go remote, we really evaluated our office budget and what it took to maintain an office for 35, 40 people. Outside of the rent, you've got your snacks, you've got your supplies, your toilet paper, it all adds up. So our commitment to our team when we went remote, and keep in mind, our team wanted this, it wasn't, that we had to give them something back, but we wanted to really keep connected. So we took 1/5 of our rent, not mentioning the other overhead costs, and we took that rent and now we put it towards annual events. So we do 4 quarterly meetings that we bring our entire team in. 90% of the day is fun, team building, different activities, reflection exercises. It's not just PowerPoints with numbers. We make our time together really meaningful. And then we take our team to Mexico every year. And I know that sounds crazy, but it is the ROI on bringing your team together to have fun with the only job for the weekend is to connect and bond. It's amazing. Our team came back from our first retreat last year just wanting to work as a team because they connected with each other behind the titles. They got to know who each other was. And so I think when we come together, we make it very meaningful, purposeful. It's time out of the office too, so it has to be worth it. But I think our whole team would agree, business for the most part gets done online. Bonding, culture, connectivity happens when we're together. It also happens offline through Slack, through one-on-ones, through employer engagement systems. But the time that we're together is really what solidifies our culture.
And we, as I said at the beginning, we have been in office. We're an in-office company. Obviously, we do have remote workers. We did not terminate any of our leases. But what it did shift our thinking in the way that we approach new office openings. So before, new office openings for us wouldn't be a question. It's capital light. We can get them up and running fairly quickly. But now we're taking the approach, one, we're not doing it as quickly, and two, we are going through with 2 cities right now. We are starting in those cities with remote employees only, and then as those people become successful, we will transition them or give them the opportunity to go back into the office. Now, I may be back here next year talking about what a disaster it is to start somebody remote and try and move them into the office. But again, it's a different approach. Gary said think differently. This is a way that we're thinking differently right now. So,
I will say one thing that we didn't do we were supposed to put in a lot more parking. We did not do that project.
Yeah.
Yeah, no need to have all the parking. Yeah, that looks different.
Oh, and quickly, just from the legal standpoint, as you look, as we are moving forward, what we are doing when we renew leases, we're evaluating those leases and looking, what do the penalty provisions look like? Everybody knows you break a lease, you're on the hook for a lot. So we're trying to negotiate those down. Our leases are not as long from a term standpoint, so as where before we'd entertain a 7 to 10 year lease, we're looking more in the 3 to 5 year range now. So little things like that when you're in office.
Yeah, and just to build on that, one thing that we learned, and I'm grateful we did not learn it the hard way because we got ahead of it, but there are some states that require employers to provide a work from home stipend if there is no physical office. We are in Illinois, and that is not a state that legally requires it, but California does. There was, I think it was a class action or whatever legal term, but an Amazon lawsuit.
Amazon, yep.
That, yeah, I read an article and took action pretty quickly. So again, we think of it though is that we don't have this brick and mortar office. We have the budget now to provide our team with a stipend. The stipend is for internet, even though everyone has internet. We want them to have the best, fastest, and feel our support. It includes being able to use it for to go to a shared workspace. So some people like being at home 3 days a week and they want to work at a place where you've got a punch card. So use your stipend for that. We do not use the stipend for extra screens and pens and notebooks. That is all part of our onboarding and just how we take care of our team. But if you do not have a physical location for them to go to as an option, you might want to consider having some stipend, just CYA.
A couple of questions have come in regarding operational successes while being remote. So I assume that means previously positions that are highly collaborative, shout over the cube, get something back. Sarah, how have you seen operations or roles that are sort of function that way previously be successful from a work from home scenario?
Yeah, some of our very tenured team members who are very high performers and have been in the job for a very long time, they can transition remotely pretty easily and be fine. Some of our newer team members, they are wildly more successful when they're in the office. And so I think, again, just looking and knowing your team and just saying, okay, if you're operations sales, senior sales a lot of times works remote. We call them BDRs or business development reps. A lot of those are in the office the majority of the week. But specifically, looking at tenure for us is really important too. How long have they been in the role? How long have they been successful in the role? Can they be successful working remotely versus being in the office all the time? They've built a lot of trust in the organization. They've proven themselves over a long period of time. And so our team trusts them, they trust us, and that just works well. But it really does just depend on the person, the role, and all of those things. But we do have, our sales and operations teams are primarily in the office with 1 or 2 days remote. So.
And I think operationally, there's no question reviewing your procedures and your processes is it's different remote than it is in person. So just reevaluating those. Why are there so many touch points? Why is there so much throwing, the ball over the wall? And just analyzing, can we streamline a little bit of this, or can we reduce some of the dependencies ultimately so somebody can operate at home more successfully? And maybe that's just reviewing what are people's strengths and weaknesses, right? And letting them, instead of kind of doing both, which you don't really highlight when they're in the office because it's not as obvious of, hey, this person's awesome at that, let's just let them run with it. And this person can do, the yin to the yang, and then they don't have to kind of do both and communicate and overlap as much. So that's where we've seen it is, let's not have to, I need to talk to them all the time. It's why do you need to talk to them all the time? Why, and maybe that is where technology enters the equation of let's get the system a little bit smarter to, when I do something, I don't have to yell at you. It's intuitive within our TMS or within, one of the tools, and even as simple as not, say, adding a feature because those are expensive or buying a new tool, but simply leveraging your existing tools, like, hey, when you do this, you need to post that in Teams. So Sarah, how have you sort of leveraged, maybe it be either a new tool or an existing tool, how have you sort of, nobody used Teams, in our company before at all, right? So what has sort of emerged as your go-to technology solutions in the new world?
Definitely Teams. Yeah, definitely Teams.
We're brand agnostic. But.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of our sales and ops people also prefer to be in the office because you're right. Like when they're working from home or they're hybrid, they're having to type a whole lot more, right? You're having to communicate through typing or be on a video, and they don't like it. So it's much easier for them to be in the office and collaborating, with the team to be able to just turn around and talk to the person or be on the phone and making, hand motions. I mean, we all have been in the business a long time. So it's, a lot of those team members prefer to be, and they can do their jobs better, and that's how they're the most successful in their role, which is what they want to be. I mean, they're obviously chasing goals and things too. So I think from a tools perspective, definitely Teams. I think leveraging, whatever TMS that you're using to the best of their ability to be able to communicate anything within a particular shipment to provide the best customer service. Making sure that your, phones are forwarded correctly. I mean, how many times have you called someone and it's like, they're out of the office when really they're not, they're just working from home and their phone's forwarded. And just making sure that all those things are worked out and you have a powerful phone system and technologies that can support that kind of work, I think is really important, so.
So a lot more typing, right? So when there's more typing, you're devoid of nonverbal communication. Jay, from an HR perspective, how do you handle the situation of, look how mean this person's being to me in this chat?
Yeah, I actually read an article within the last month. It was about hostile work environment claims in the post-COVID world, and those hostile work environment claims typically arise from communication between and amongst employees. So, one of the ways that I guess we're indirectly dealing with that, similar to what Sarah said at the beginning, we have put a focus on leadership, and as part of that leadership training, we focus a lot on communication because there's a very big difference between someone being direct and, as Eric said, being a meanie. And honestly, it's tough to navigate in the workplace. People can be sensitive at times, and you do have to work through that. But coaching your people up on communication, it can save you a lot of time, a lot of headaches, but more importantly, a lot of money. Because even if people are making a hostile work environment, they're making legal claims in the employment context, employment claims are not cheap. And they bring people into your world that you may not otherwise want to see. People like the EEOC, they're wonderful people. They're a massive headache to deal with. So again, getting in front of those things, and communication is a soft skill anyway. It's something that we should be teaching our people all of the time. So effective communication is a way to avoid, again, an otherwise expensive claim.
So we're coming up on time, so we'll just rapid fire. What skills do leaders need in 2023 that they maybe didn't need is to focus on as much pre-COVID? Sarah, we'll start with you because that was my curveball. I waited 58 minutes.
That they didn't need
I waited
pre-COVID?
Well, just from a leadership perspective, where have people needed to get stronger faster that they have had to accelerate development from a leadership?
Yeah. I definitely think just connecting with their team intentionally, like actually putting it in your planner. When you're in the office all the time or you're always together, it just happens organically. And I think you've just got to be intentional. Like I can't say that enough. I think that intentionality, it just goes a long way. And getting feedback, asking for feedback. I think we did that a little bit before. I think you really have to do it now. Like, how are they doing? Check in on them, and just take the extra step.
I'd say empathy. As a woman in this industry, I used to feel that empathy was a weakness, and I couldn't be too kind or too compassionate because what would they think of me, and I'd get run over. And what I've really realized in the last 2 years is that empathy and compassion belong in the workplace very much. And it's just this idea of being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and it generally provides clarity. It can solve a lot of problems, communication, really get to know that person. So I think the more you can have empathy and listen and consider case-by-case scenarios while keeping everything equal is probably the most important leadership skill.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ash.
Good job, good job. Great job, thank you, thank you, great job, great job. Great job. The